Hey everybody, we're going to try a little different format in today's video. Got this screen set behind me. This will go with the chapter in the book. So I got my books here. This is the Tunedfit book that we've been talking about. We're in the getting started chapter and we're coming out of it. So I broke it up into three lessons, 3 videos, so it wouldn't be too much. But this one we're getting into this thing called macros defined. But it really has to do with the fuel that we feed our bodies with. It's like going to a gas station and putting diesel in a car that doesn't burn diesel. It just doesn't work very well. Matter of fact, it can cause a lot of damage. So what we want to do is sort of step back and say, okay, what is it that we're eating? And define some terms. So we're still in the term definition. And then the next couple chapters, we'll start putting this knowledge into practice. So we start off with this little picture here. These guys, when I first sat down with Steve, his comment was, we could make you a skinny peach or a fat peach, or we could flip that peach upside down. So at that time, I looked like a peach, and so it was just your choice. And there's my friend Steve, and he sat down with me and said, you have a choice. This is on page 31 in the book. Is we all have a choice. What are we going to do? What are we going to eat? No one's forcing food into our mouths, but a lot of times we don't even know what it is, and we base it on tasting good. And we're going to talk about that. This guy, Lord Kelvin, he has a saying that says, I often say that when you can measure what you are speaking about and express it in terms of numbers, you know something about it. But when you cannot measure it, when you cannot express it in numbers, your knowledge is of meager and unsatisfactory kind. It may be the beginning of knowledge, but you have scarcely in your thoughts advanced to the stage of science, whatever the matter may be. In this case, we're talking about food. A lot of times I didn't know that the food had measures. There was different, I just had no idea. This is stuff I wish I had known. And we're going to talk about a thing called glycemic index. That's a measure. We're going to talk about the energy and calorie and what is that. And then we're going to talk about macros. I didn't know what a macro was, but those are the macro nutrients called protein, carbohydrates, and fat. So in this video, we're going to just sort of hit some definitions. We're going to start hopefully seeing a relationship between food and function, and then that'll set the stage for the remaining chapters in the book. In the last video, I talked about this glycemic index. I mentioned, I wake up in the morning and have a donut, which is high sugar. My blood sugar goes up, my insulin kicks in, and I crash 3 hours later, and I have to eat. So we go up and down. And that's the glycogen levels, or our blood sugar. Managing our blood sugar is a challenge, but if you do that, there's a lot of benefits. And I talked about that in the last video. But the glycogen level can be estimated with a number called the glycemic index. The glycemic index is a number based on 100 being sugar, pure sugar, and it has this curve of when it affects your blood sugar and when it trails off. And so you can see as the glycemic index is lower, it doesn't affect it as much and it takes longer. As you get into food that is like a candy bar, it can shoot up very high, above 100 even. And you can take a look at this table here in the book on page 60. I don't have my glasses on, page 60. You can see several examples. And what you want is to start looking at the food that you're eating, kind of estimate the blood sugar impact. And maybe look at your cycles throughout the day. So am I eating chips and Coke and Mountain Dew and M&Ms, chocolate, and look at how that affects your glycemic index. The closer to 100 or higher it is, it's very fast, and it goes out of your system very fast. So that causes those swings in your energy levels. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is the glycemic index of your food. And as you move towards more unrefined, more natural food, and you'll see that on the chart, you tend to reduce the impact of your food on your blood sugar. To me, that was a big deal when I started learning about blood sugar and blood sugar management. And I mentioned my relatives that have diabetes and they have to do this by hand. We that don't have to do that are so fortunate, and it's great that there's science out there for people that don't have the mechanisms to work. But we shouldn't be abusing that. And as we learn how insulin affects our body and how sugar affects our body, we can manage that, and that helps us along the way. But what we're trying to move towards is this concept of food as energy or food as fuel. It comes into our body, we call that metabolism, and your body either uses up the food that you're eating or it doesn't. And if there's a surplus, it stores it as energy or fat, or it uses it for bodily functions, and we're going to get into that here in a minute. So food, it either gets used or stored, or, you go to the restroom, but primarily it's either going into your muscles or going into fat or going into energy. That's the relationship that we're going to be talking about over and over here and then the next chapters, we're going to get into where are you defining that and where do you want to go, and then lining those up. It's your choice. So we're going to get into that, but we're defining some terms. These two charts are what they call the basal metabolic rate, or how our food's being used. This one kind of shows, 20 to 30% of our calories, the food that we eat is a measure of calories. The caloric energy value of food is being eaten. 20 to 30% of that goes towards activity, just moving around. That's 20 to 30%. There's a roughly 8 to 10%, which is in the amount of food and the type and the digestion, just breaking it down so we can use it. There's about 10%. And then you've got the rest, which is just how you live. You're not really paying attention to breathe in, breathe out, or make my heart beat or blink. Those are activities that, we are fearfully and wonderfully made, and those subsystems are working and they take energy. So your food actually does these things. It provides so you can do work. It provides so you can break your food down. It provides so that you can blink, talk, breathe, whatever. So when we look at this, and that's where if you look at the difference between guys and girls, this is a 3,500, 2,000 calories is what the FDA says is roughly the daily allotment of calories, just strict calories. That's right around here. And so you can see where men are at and women are at. And we're going to get into that in a couple chapters to try to estimate that. I'm still trying to define some things. What can you affect? You can affect your energy usage, and you can affect the quality of food going into you. This area that has to do with keeping you alive, you can't do workout too much on that. I mean, there's a little bit, but where you can get the biggest bang is your exercise and your food. And we're going to talk about that. Now, moving along here is you can see that as you eat food that's not very good for you, in terms it has very few macronutrients. And we talked about that last lesson, but if it's like cotton candy, it has no substance, you tend to feed up and your body's saying, feed me, so you're always hungry. Then you're eating food that's highly refined, so it has a high glycemic index. So you're rocking your blood sugar, and over time you just feel bad. You feel yucky. You don't feel very good, and your energy levels are because you don't have any food for actual activity, and you just feel bad. And that's the problem. You get into this cycle where your mind's saying, I like this kind of food, it's available, I can go to the vending machine, but it leaves you wanting, it leaves you not feeling very good. Whereas you start shifting your focus to unrefined foods and more natural foods, or at least keeping track of the sugar income, you can see that you're fueling yourself. So imagine putting better fuel in your car. It runs better, it idles better, it operates better. That's how our bodies are. If we put better food in us, we operate better. So I don't like to call food good or bad. It's not morally good or bad. It's like, you go to detention. It has to do with the nutrients that make that up. How do you define highly nutritious food and food that is had it all sucked out? We talked about that before, but literally the closer it gets to unrefined, the more natural it is. The more natural, the better it is. And the taste buds, all that stuff has a part to play. When you've been dosing yourself with high sugar, you numb your taste buds. So when you first start this journey, you're going to have withdrawals, and just be prepared. You may have bad breath. You may sweat as the toxins change. And I went through all those. You may even have withdrawals, but keep in mind that there will become a time that when you start feeding yourself with better food, your body rewards you with that euphoric feeling that, hey, I'm using this. And so there will be times that if I go to an office to have lunch and it's food that I know is not very good for me, I just would rather not eat. Or I'll take some supplements or some bars that I'm comfortable with and eat those. Because you get to a point, it's like, I just don't want to put bad food in me because it makes me feel bad. So we want to make you feel better. We want to get you from a peach and flip that upside down to get some muscle tone, get your waist down, get the fat off, and start to use it. So one of the big things probably that is the measure of a calorie. And we'll get into how, but every food has a label, and at the top it's calories. How many calories does this food? So calorie is a unit of energy that food and drinks provide to our body. It needs these to function from basic survival to physical activity, which we talked about. To maintain a healthy weight, you must balance the calories you consume with the calories your body burns. Consuming more calories than your body uses leads to weight gain, while burning more calories than you consume results in weight loss. So this is really what we're trying to do, is if you're eating too much and in a sedentary life, it just gets, the body's like, oh, I just want to make sure that he's okay. I'm going to store this food. And that's where you swell up great big and get fat. So as you start learning to exercise, learning to eat, your body starts releasing those fat stores, and you start to go from an upside down peach to a peach to an upside down peach. Now, what's interesting is a calorie is a unit of measure. It's a calories of energy. In some places they call them joules. We call them calories here in the States. But a calorie is made up of a thing called a protein. 1 gram of protein takes 4 calories. In my mind, I think of that as, if I had a chunk, how much energy would it take to melt it or break it down? So whatever that is there's 4 units of energy to break that down. Carbohydrates have 4 calories per gram, but look at fat. Fat has 9 calories, so it takes a lot more energy to break down a gram, which means that has more energy for consumption. That's why fats are so good for energy usage, because it doesn't take very much, but it takes your body twice as long to burn it off. So when you look at a calorie, this is the universal equation, and you can look on your labels. Take your protein times 4, grams of protein times 4, plus grams of carbs times 4, plus grams of fat times 9. That is the total calories. And so we're going to be talking about that much more when we get into reading food. But I just wanted to start letting you understand that as you start monitoring your food, what are you taking in terms of your macros and your macro profile. So there are several macro profiles we're going to get to. If you have a particular goal in mind, there are macro profiles. Matter of fact, this is where in my other life, in my engineering life, I wrote this book, Single Loop Control Methods, which is tuning industrial controllers with proportional, integral, and derivative. We're not going to go into that, but when I realized there was 3 variables here, proteins, fats, and carbs, those are kind of like tuning numbers. So I could define where I want to go, I could define the macro profile, and then I just make it happen. That, to me, it just sort of clicked. And we're going to explain that, and hopefully you'll have that aha moment. But right now, we're just trying to define terms. Okay. Now, I'm not a nutritionist or a doctor. I just am an engineer, and I try to follow this. This is a flow chart of how proteins, carbs, and fats get converted into muscle activity and storage of it. And if you want to get into that, that gets into your amino acids, that gets into so many things, and that's a fascinating field of study. And if you want, Steve will talk to you a long time about that. What I'm going to do is just sort of say, yes, there's a lot of research that had been done to figure out how your body breaks down and finds the nutrients to funnel it. But in my little head, I realized that our carbs and fat, the food that we eat, the energy that we consume is measured in calories. Calories further broke down into proteins, carbs, and fat. And what made sense to me is these big arrows is kind of the most, and this is where there's a lot of discussions, whether you go with paleo or you go with ketosis, you go with different kinds of diets. But I like this to keep it as protein typically drives your muscle. So if you grab your arm or your leg, the muscle, that's typically your body really likes to use protein for lean muscle. And then your energy, your activity, you know, it's sort of like your carbs want to go right into activity. A lot of people have said carbs are bad. Well, no, again, carbs aren't morally good or bad. Too many carbs spill over into fat storage, the same as protein can spill. This is called spillover. And then fat, your body likes to store fat. If you're not going to use it, it will store it. And that's what those side lobes are on your hips and your stomach and your neck. But fat typically is stored energy. Carbs is activity. Protein is muscle. So that's how it kind of clicked to me. And then the question is, well, what is a protein, a fat, and a carb? Well, on pages 50 to 52 in the book, you know, I've got a whole bunch of tables. And that's where the program like Lose It, or there's several out there where you can type in, you know, your food and it'll give you the macronutrients right off the page. But like protein or egg whites, chicken, turkey, lean beef, yogurt, whey protein, bison, you know, fats are like olive oil, egg yolks, butter, avocado, mayonnaise. Carbohydrates are the yummy things. It's the bread, some potatoes, fruits, sugars, oatmeal. You know, there's some that are, that's the other tricky thing about this. Food isn't just a protein. Food isn't just a carb. Food isn't just a fat. It's a combination. So you have like a whole egg. It has egg whites and yolks. You know, salmon, cheese. You know, they have a combination. Proteins and carbs. You can see skim milk, peas, quinoa, beans. You know, you can see fat and carbs, fried snacks, chocolate, ice cream. This is why we like this so much. It's got a lot of fat in it. Our body likes to store it. It has a lot of carbs that we put in, the simple carbs, which is the glycemic index, and it affects that taste bud in our tongue. So unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, without knowledge, we tend to slide into here. Give me cake, give me ice cream. These are what we call comfort foods. And I'm all about comfort foods, but keep them in perspective, you know, depending on, is this helping you reach your goal? If not, you have to start redistributing the food. Awareness is a big part, you know, and I don't want to freak you out, but just kind of being aware of the food that I didn't know any of this stuff. For decades, I didn't know this stuff. You know, I thought a Milky Way or a steak is 200 calories. Let's just go. Well, a steak is protein and a little bit of fat, where a candy bar is all fat with a little bit of carb. No wonder I couldn't grow muscle. I wasn't preparing myself for the muscle that aligned with the food and the fuel that I was feeding. So just opening your head to understanding what a calorie is, and I want you to start thinking about how many calories am I eating per day. You know, the FDA says 2,000. I'll help you dial that in here in a minute, or in a couple series. But you need to start being aware, am I having 6,000 calories a day? That's probably, unless you're a marathon runner or a heavy lifter doing strongman, that's probably too much. So we're going to get into that. So how do you know? The next 2 chapters is reading data. Every piece of food that you get from the store has an information label. What you need to do is overpower the mental side of saying, I want this candy bar, to let me take a look at what that candy bar has in it. And then you might say, oh, that doesn't help me with my goal that I'm on. I need to change that. You may look at it starts off with how many calories does this thing have in it? And then it goes, we're going to get into the rest of it. So right now, I really want you focusing on calories and then the carbohydrates and the added sugar. So in this case, this isn't bad. There's 5 grams of added sugar and 30 grams of carbs. So that'd be 5 divided by 30 times 100. That would be the percent. It's about 1.5 to 2%. That's pretty good. When you see that your sugar is close to like 28 or 29, it's almost 90 or above, then it's a simple sugar. It's got a high glycemic index. It's going to result in a crash in about 2 to 3 hours. So just starting to know some of this stuff about what's a fat, what's a protein, what's a carb, what's the sugar content in the food that I'm eating, what's the glycemic index. Remember, we're on a journey. I'm trying to give you the information so that you're not just doing a fad diet. Yeah, you can do a fad diet and you'll lose weight, but have no idea why. I've talked to a lot of people that the food comes to them, they eat it, they lose weight. When they get off that diet, they balloon back up. I don't want you to do that. I want you to learn what it is you're eating, okay? Now, it's our choice. Do you want to be a skinny peach, or do you want to flip that peach upside down? Our fuel, it's food and function. They start to have a very distinct relationship. And that's what the next 2 chapters are going to be, is like, where do I start? Where am I? And I recommend that you do get a physical, do talk to your doctor. I told you in a couple of videos that I was so unhealthy. The doctor, this has happened twice. I was so unhealthy, they said, you can't start. We don't want you to start. So keep that in mind. But understand where you're at and what you can do, and we'll start working towards that. Remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint. And I told you in one of the videos, I'll tell you again, I'm 61. When I started, I was 48. That means I had roughly 40 years of not really knowing what I was doing, and I was at risk and overweight and bad things for my physical. And I wanted to fix it like right now. I want to get it off. It took you 20 to 30 years to get to this point. It's not going to come off in a week or a month. So you have to start thinking about a routine. Start thinking about what you're eating. Be aware of your body, your stomach's saying, feed me. It's not saying, I want this many grams of protein. You have to jump in there and say, okay, how do I interpret the command to eat? Where have I been? Have I been too many carbs? Do I have too much glycemic index? Have I messed up my blood sugar? So that when you start to refeed yourself, you're feeding yourself based upon the fuel that your body needs. It's going to hurt. It is going to be uncomfortable, but you can make it. And you will hit a wall, and that's where you need an accountability team. You need somebody to help you through that. And I wish the road would just keep going, and it does go pretty straight. It kind of wiggles on the way up. But we want success. We want you to believe, I think I did it, you can do it. It takes 30 to 60 days to get into a habit. So that's why in these lessons, I'm giving you a little bit of an activity on each one. It's getting a little more in depth. But start recording your weight. Give yourself a baseline between, that's what I try to do when I'm working with people, is look at their weight, look at their calorie input, then look at their calorie outgo. So start writing that down. I've got these charts. If you want, you can order this book. This is it's just a log book. I used to make them in spreadsheets, and then it's just, for me, it's cheaper to buy this than to, so I'll get into it. But like right here, I would just very quickly put down, I ate this for breakfast, I ate this for my second meal, I ate this for my lunch, and I would try to estimate I had software that I would write this stuff down, and then I would summarize it at the end, kind of showing, okay, this was how many carbs, proteins, fats, this is what I ate. And right now, I don't want you to go too crazy on this, but just start, on a sheet of paper or on a notebook. It doesn't have to be fancy. Just write down what you ate, what time you ate it, and estimate, if you can, the volume and the calorie. What's the calories? Read them. And then write down the carbs and the sugar. So you can start understanding the glycemic index on you, the calories, and we start balancing our food input and our function. And exercise is a little bit hard. Unless you have a smartwatch, sometimes those will tell you how much exercise, but it's real close to 10 calories per minute. So if you work out for 30 minutes, that's 300 calories of energy. So keep that in mind. One candy bar is about 240 calories. If you do moderate jogging for 30 minutes, that's about a candy bar. So I'll show that a little bit later, is how much exercise it takes to burn off bad food. Eventually it clicks. You say, well, maybe I don't need that bad food. So that's what we're going to get into. I've got charts. You can use this if you want, or make your own. Don't forget why you started this. Why do you need to change? What's your goal? What's your aim in life? Don't forget those. What's your plan? You're building that as we're going. You're formulating it. You're building habits. I'm asking you to record. I'm asking you to keep track. I'm asking you to make mental distinctions. That may not have been something you've ever done before. And then find a team that you can be accountable with. Some of you have already reached out to me, and I'm thankful for that. As it helps me, when you guys give me a like on these videos, it helps encourage. These didn't just exist. So I'm taking them and putting them together. This is the format that I prefer when I'm doing lectures, is PowerPoint, and we'll see how this goes. I'm going to post this and see if it works out for you. And the next chapter is building a bridge, and that's where we get into, I didn't know this either, is, where do you measure? They have charts if you want to measure, if you want to do pinch tests, weight, pictures, mirrors, all that kind of stuff. What's a function? We're going to talk about the different types of bodies and what the best functions are. We're going to share some of that. I want you to not, if you're, 4'2" and want to be an NBA center, we might want to talk. So let's make sure that the function and the form and the food are all balanced. I've had people say, well, you were a bodybuilder. I don't want to be a bodybuilder. I'm like, guys, I didn't start off to be a bodybuilder. This was actually a secret. I tried to hide this, and then I find God has a sense of humor. I trained for a year a year and a half actually for this show, and nobody knew I was doing it. I just was losing weight. And then I go and do this show. A magazine found out about it and put me on a cover of this Performance Perillo products, and it went to, I had people coming up and say, are you this guy? The cat was out of the bag. No, I wanted to get in shape to play with my kids. Now it's to play with my grandkids, and now it's to recover and be better than I was before cancer, so I can maybe help people along the way. Folks, it's your story, it's your chapter, it's your time. We only have so much in this life, and when you learn how to eat, you learn how to exercise, it improves your quality of life tremendously. And heaven forbid you have an issue come up in your life, this road that I'm showing you will help you deal with that. If I hadn't have been a master's athlete for the last 10 years, when I went into this cancer, prostate cancer, I don't think I would have recovered as fast, or maybe at all. So get started no matter where you're at, whether you're 20, 30, you're teaching your kids, your grandkids, work with them so they can learn these things and avoid the giant holes that we've gone in. Thank you for your time, and that wraps up this lesson. The next lesson, we will get into building a bridge. You take care, and it's not too late.